If you've ever stared at a price tag and felt your chest tighten before your mind even did the math, this story is for you. There's a kind of fear that shows up before the numbers do. You haven't even checked the account yet, and already your shoulders are climbing toward your ears. That fear isn't about the price of anything. It's older than money itself. And today, you're going to meet the man who taught an entire village where that fear actually comes from. Today, I want to tell you about a merchant named Devarim, a man so famously careful with his coins that mothers used him as a warning to their children. He kept 7 rules, written on 7 strips of cloth sewn into the lining of his coat, and he believed those 7 rules were the reason he had never gone hungry a single day in his life. But one autumn, an old monk arrived in his village and asked him a single question, 7 words long, that made Devarim realize he had followed the wrong rule his entire life. What that question was and what it cost him to answer honestly, we'll get to. First, you need to understand the coat he wore and why he never let anyone touch it. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, which rule about money did you inherit without ever choosing it yourself? Something your father said, or your mother did, that you've never once questioned. You might be surprised how many people carry the exact same inherited fear, dressed up as caution. The town of Amarapur sat where 2 dusty trade roads crossed, and Devarim's stall sat at the busiest corner of it, stacked with bolts of dyed cloth, jars of pressed oil, and small clay figurines that travelers liked to carry home as proof they had passed through somewhere interesting. He had built the stall from nothing, starting as a boy who carried baskets for other merchants, sleeping under their carts, eating whatever they didn't finish. He remembered hunger the way some men remember a wound that never fully closes. It wasn't a memory to him. It was a weather system that lived permanently behind his ribs. By the time he was 40, Devarim owned 3 stalls, a stone house with a tiled roof, and more silver than most men in Amarapur would see across their whole lives. And yet he still counted his coins twice before sleeping, still argued over a single copper piece with customers who could see, plainly, that he did not need it. His coat, heavy and patched at the elbows despite his wealth, held the 7 strips of cloth his own father had sewn in before he died. Each strip carried a rule. Save before you spend. Trust no one with your ledger. A coin saved is a day of hunger avoided. Devarim treated these rules the way a soldier treats his armor, and like armor, they had kept something dangerous away from him for 30 years. The question nobody asked was what exactly that armor was keeping out, or in. His wife, Sarala, had stopped asking him to buy new shoes for their daughter 2 winters ago, not because he could not afford them, but because the conversation always ended the same way. A long silence, then a quiet, immovable no, followed by 3 days of him checking and rechecking the household ledger as though her question had put a crack in something. Their daughter Mira was 7, and she wore shoes 2 sizes too small because a new pair, in her father's private arithmetic, was one hunger away from disaster, even though there had been no real hunger in that house for 15 years. Remember Mira's shoes. They matter later. It was on a gray morning in late autumn, with the trade road half empty and the wind carrying the first bite of winter, that an old monk walked into Amarapur carrying nothing but a wooden bowl and a walking stick worn smooth by decades of use. He did not beg, exactly. He simply sat near the stalls each day and accepted whatever was offered, and by evening he was always gone, sleeping somewhere outside the village that no one had ever located. The other merchants ignored him, the way people learn to ignore anything that asks nothing of them. But Devarim, who noticed money and the movement of money the way other men notice weather, found himself watching the monk's bowl. It was never full. It was never empty either. It simply held exactly what the day had given it. No more, no less. And somehow the monk seemed entirely unbothered by that fact. On the 3rd day, Devarim approached him, more out of suspicion than curiosity. He wanted to understand the trick, because in his experience, everyone had one. "You own nothing," Devarim said, not quite a question. "How do you not live in fear?" The monk looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that seems to measure a man's whole life rather than his words, and said only this: "I own nothing, so nothing owns me." Devaram laughed, the short, dismissive laugh of a man who has decided someone else's answer is too simple to be useful. He walked away thinking he had wasted his time on a beggar's riddle. But that night, for the first time in years, he did not check his ledger before bed. He lay awake instead, turning the monk's sentence over like a coin he could not quite identify. And here is where everything in Devaram's carefully guarded life began, very quietly, to come apart. The next morning, a caravan came through Amaripur, carrying news that hit the market like a dropped stone. A trade route 2 days east had been raided, and 3 merchants Devaram knew personally, men wealthier than him, men with warehouses instead of stalls, had lost nearly everything overnight. One of them, it was said, sat in the wreckage of his own storehouse and wept, not for his goods, but because he suddenly did not know who he was without them. The traders repeated the detail again and again as they passed through the stalls, the way people repeat the parts of a story that frighten them the most, that this man, who had once been able to buy the entire market twice over, sat in the ash with his hands empty and could not stop shaking, not from cold, but from something closer to grief for a version of himself he had never met without his warehouses standing behind him. Devaram listened to this story with a coldness in his stomach that felt uncomfortably close to recognition. He went back to his own stall that afternoon and, without quite meaning to, began counting his inventory twice, then a third time, as though the counting itself might ward something off. His hands moved through the familiar motions, but his mind kept returning to the weeping man in the ashes. He thought of his 7 cloth rules, sewn tight into his coat, and for the first time in his life he wondered whether they had ever actually protected him from ruin, or whether they had simply given the fear of ruin a permanent address inside his chest, a room it could always retreat to, no matter how much he owned. That evening, walking home past the shuttered stalls, he passed a beggar child sleeping against the temple wall, and something in the boy's curled posture, arms wrapped tight around his own knees, struck Devaram with a force he could not immediately explain. He stood there longer than he meant to, until he realized what he was seeing. Himself, 30 years earlier, sleeping under a cart that wasn't his, guarding nothing because he had nothing to guard. He had spent 3 decades building walls specifically so he would never again feel like that child. And yet standing there, wealthy, sheltered, fed, he realized he still felt exactly like that child. Every single night he checked his ledger before sleep. But what he didn't know yet was that the monk had heard the same news and had a very particular reason for staying in Amaripur a few more days. Devaram sought him out again that evening, less suspicious this time, more unsettled. He told him about the ruined merchants, about the weeping man in the ashes of his own warehouse. He asked, almost angrily, how anyone could build a life on so little that a single bad season could not take it from them. The monk set down his bowl and asked Devaram to open his coat, to show him the 7 strips of cloth his father had sewn there so long ago. Devaram did, reluctantly, the way a man shows a wound he has learned to be ashamed of. The monk read each rule slowly, nodding at some, pausing at others, and when he finished, he folded the coat closed again and said nothing for a long while. This is the detail Devaram would return to for the rest of his life. The monk did not tell him his rules were wrong. He told him they were incomplete. 6 of them, he said, were simply the wisdom of a frightened man trying to survive, and there was no shame in that. But the 7th strip, the one that read, "Never spend on what does not multiply," had quietly become the rule beneath all the others, the one that decided everything, even when Devaram didn't notice it deciding. And that single rule, the monk said, had slowly convinced Devaram that love and money followed the same law, that anything given away without a guaranteed return was a kind of foolishness. Devaram wanted to argue. He opened his mouth to defend a lifetime of careful choices. But before he could speak, the monk asked him the question. 7 words, delivered gently, without accusation, the way a physician might point to a wound the patient had learned to stop feeling. What has your wealth actually kept you safe from? Devaram stood there in the cooling evening air and found, to his own quiet horror, that he had no answer. He had assumed his entire life that the coins were a wall between himself and the hungry boy he used to be. But the hungry boy was still there, still counting, still afraid, wearing a wealthy man's coat. The coins had never made the fear go away. They had simply given the fear somewhere expensive to live. That night he did not sleep. He sat at his table with the ledger open and unread in front of him, and for the first time he let himself remember, fully and without flinching, what it had actually felt like to be that hungry boy carrying baskets under other men's carts. He remembered that the hunger had ended, eventually the same year in fact, that he'd started his first stall. He remembered that he had been safe, genuinely safe, for 15 years. And he remembered that he had never once let himself feel it. By morning, something in him had gone quiet, in a way it hadn't been quiet in decades. The lesson here is not about coats or coins or a monk's empty bowl. It's about the seventh rule that most of us are carrying without ever having chosen it. The belief that safety is a number, and that once we reach the right number, the fear will finally stop. That merchant is you. Every time you open your banking app, hoping the figure on the screen will finally make you feel calm, and it doesn't. And you tell yourself it will next time, at the next number, the one just a little higher than this one. This is the psychology of apego, of attachment, and it has almost nothing to do with arithmetic. You can be wealthy and still be the hungry boy under the cart. You can have enough, by any honest measure, and still feel the old fear deciding your choices for you, sewn so deep into your coat that you've stopped noticing it's even there. Sufficiency was never a threshold you cross with enough zeros. It is a decision you make, again and again, usually in the quiet moments no one else sees. So what do you do with this, tonight, practically? First, find your seventh rule. Somewhere in your own habits with money, there is a belief you inherited rather than chose. Something a parent said once, in fear or in love, that quietly became the rule beneath all your other rules. It might sound like, you can never have too much saved, or spending on yourself is selfish, or simply a number you've never told anyone, the amount that would finally let you exhale. Sit with it honestly for 5 minutes before you sleep tonight and simply name it out loud, even if there's no one else in the room. Naming it is not the same as obeying it, and that distinction matters more than it sounds. Second, spend once, deliberately, on something that will never multiply. Not an investment, not a purchase you can justify with returns, not something you'll explain later as strategic. A pair of shoes for someone who has outgrown theirs. A meal for someone who didn't ask. An afternoon off that produces nothing measurable at all. Let yourself feel the discomfort of that spending without fixing it, without explaining it away, without immediately calculating what it cost you in some other column. That discomfort is the fear talking, the seventh rule defending its territory. And it is allowed to talk without you obeying it. Third, before you sleep, write down 3 things money cannot buy that you already quietly own. Not things you hope to have once the number is right. Things you already hold, tonight, in this life, exactly as it already is. A person who would sit with you in the ashes if your warehouse burned. A body that still lets you walk to the market. A child, somewhere in your life, whose laughter doesn't check your bank balance before it decides to arrive. Devaram, in the weeks that followed, did something none of the other merchants in Amarapur understood. He bought Mira new shoes, the correct size, and said nothing about the ledger for 3 days. He did not become careless. He still counted his coins, still watched his stalls, still worked as hard as he ever had. But something underneath the counting had changed. He had stopped asking the coins to do a job they were never able to do. Picture him now, at the end of that particular day, standing in the doorway of his stone house, as the light goes copper over the rooftops of Amarapur, his coat hanging on its hook by the door for the first time in years. The 7 strips of cloth still sewn inside it, unremoved because he had decided he didn't need to destroy the old rules to stop obeying the wrong one. Somewhere behind him, Mira runs across the floor in shoes that finally fit, laughing at nothing in particular, the way children do when nothing is actually wrong. And Devaram, watching her, understands what the monk meant, finally, in his own words, rather than the monk's. He had spent 30 years trying to buy his way out of fear. What he needed, all along, was permission to put a single strip of cloth down. If there is one thing worth carrying out of Amarapur tonight, it's this. The safety you're chasing with the next number was never going to arrive with a number at all. It arrives the moment you stop asking money to do the one job it was never built for. If this story gave you even one moment of that same quiet, there are more waiting for you here. Next time, I'll tell you about a king who traded his crown for a single night of real sleep, and what he asked for in return when he woke. Walk gently, hold loosely,